our series on Jesus and not religion. Sorry, I think it's in my pocket, not liking it. I'll see what I can do about that. And we are, believe it or not, we are on week 7 of this, and we're coming down the home stretch. I'm sure y'all are ready to move on to something else. Or not, and I'll have to end it anyway. And tonight, we are going to talk about trueness. If you're taking notes, and I do hope you are, we're talking about trueness. And tonight's going to be a little bit different. Because in the past 6 weeks, we have been focusing heavily on stories of Jesus in the Bible and putting them in a different context, knowing that Jesus is playful. Jesus is fiercely intentional. He's honest. He's generous. He's oh so human. And I'm missing one that I can't remember at the moment. No, that wasn't one of it. I don't know. Huh? Meek? Humble. Humility. Thank you. We did that one last week. I should remember that better. However, here we are. Tonight we're going to focus. We're not taking our focus off of Jesus, but we're going to shine a little bit more of the spotlight on us tonight. Okay? I know, I'm apprehensive about it too. See, we live in a world where scandals are the norm. Self-doubt means that someone is trustworthy. Superheroes in all the movies are flawed. They're riddled with doubt, or maybe they're fighting an addiction of some sort. And if anyone is absolutely certain, full of boldness or strong convictions, we just don't trust them. We don't. They're selling something. They could be a conspiracy theorist. They could be a terrorist. Or they might be a Christian. You never know what they're selling. And we expect corruption to exist in every institution, no matter how wholesome it may appear. And that's sad. The court of public opinion holds trials and holds all trial members guilty till proven innocent, whether or not they're actually exonerated. Skepticism is almost a virtue in modern society. And what this has done to our perception of Jesus is far more subtle. You see, in this new wave of Christianity and some of the people who are coming up, they don't think, and sometimes we don't think about Jesus as a hero that he was, but we think of him more as a humanitarian. He's not a warrior battling behind enemy lines, going uphill through a minefield like we've talked about. He's just a humble man trying to do good in a hurting world. If we picture Jesus as doubting and uncertain about things, it makes us feel a lot better about the doubts and the uncertainties we have in ourselves. You see, we know that Jesus had a dark night when he was in Gethsemane and he was betrayed. And in that next 24 hours during his crucifixion, we'd be forgiven for thinking that Jesus was questioning God when he famously said, "Eli, Eli," and I forget how to say the rest of it properly, but it translated to, my God, why have you forsaken me?" And I believe that that's been mistaught, personally. Because if you look, Jesus wasn't making an original statement. Jesus was quoting verse 1 of Psalm 22. And as far as I'm concerned, Jesus was giving us a really good clue about what was happening. Because Psalm 22, if you read it, we're not going to read it, but Psalm 22 talks about the suffering servant, and there are so many prophecies that David wrote 700 years before Jesus actually died on the cross, and it covers him dying on the cross, and then there's a flip about 2/3 of the way through the psalm, and he's resurrected. And he's revealed in glory and power and all of that. Wonderfully. I recommend you look at it if you haven't before, because I always thought Psalm 22, yeah, it's the one right before Psalm 23. Turns out there's a lot more to it than that. Anyhow, that dark period of Jesus' life lasted less than 24 hours. He went through this abyss and was able to pass through it because of something much deeper within him. You see, when Jesus returns, when the second coming happens, he comes mounted on a white horse with an army beside him to end this age and usher in the next one. And he's called by a name we haven't heard him called in the Gospels: faithful and true. Revelation 19:11, and I like using the Amplified Classic. I do have a few verses in the updated Amplified tonight. I will make sure I point out what those are. Revelation 19:11. After that I saw heaven opened, and behold, a white horse appeared. The one who was riding it is called Faithful, which means trustworthy, loyal, incorruptible, steady, and true. And he passes judgment and wages war in righteousness, in holiness, in justice, and in uprightness. Now think for a moment that Jesus can be named trustworthy, loyal, incorruptible, steady, faithful, and true. No one else can be called that. Jesus is all of those things. He doesn't try to be. He doesn't work at it. He simply is. And in contrast, we're going to look at two stories from the book Beautiful Outlaw by John Eldredge, which we're using sort of for an outline of this sermon series. And the first story happens when Eldredge and his family were visiting Europe. They were hosted by a wealthy family that was known for their hospitality. And they acted so warm and so inviting. There was a kiss on both cheeks, a place of honor at the table. There were toasts made to them during the dinner. And Eldredge talks about how when his family was leaving, he was asking himself, why doesn't my family act like that? Why aren't we so generous and so benevolent and so friendly to outsiders? And his son pointed out that he thought it was really creepy. Eldredge did a double take. It was a school bell ending the daydream, is what it was. And his son pointed out that during that entire evening of conversation, an entire evening filled with food and drink and conversation and supposed warmth, they didn't ask one personal question. They didn't want to know anything about the family they were hosting. It was a false intimacy. And what their host family had been concerned with was the image of warmth and intimacy, not those things themselves. But they were so good at it, it made you feel like you were wrong to question them on it. And therein lies the rub, to quote the bard. You see, Jesus knows a kiss on the cheek isn't always what it looks like. And another story from Eldredge is from his attending a conference with some 10,000 other people, the kind of conference they'd hold at the Sprint Center. They held Women of Faith at the Sprint Center for a few years. I worked one of them. Let me tell you, it was all kinds of interesting. But that's another story for another time. What Eldredge talks about at this conference, there was sort of an all-star roster of Christian leaders and speakers. And the first speaker was described as being on the cutting edge of what was happening in the church at the time. Young, gifted, and very hip. I don't think I'm much of those things, but young, gifted, very hip this man was. And the speaker, yes? Uh-oh. It's hard to go to church here sometimes, folks. But it's all in love. Anyway, so the speaker told two stories that really didn't relate to the content of his sermon at all. But what they did do was they made him look pretty cool. One was about helping a homeless woman get some food. And he says it was kind of funny and serious in balance. And the other story wound up with him being in the middle of an international Formula One racing circuit event. The overall effect of the stories was to make Christianity, not to mention the speaker, look so cool. But think for a moment about how deep the human longing to be loved and admired exists within us. And if you speak publicly, it's even worse. There's a reason after the sermon I asked if it was good. I want to know that I did okay. I also want my vanity to be assuaged a little bit. I'm not too proud to tell you. And having people listen to what you're saying, listening intently to what you're saying, can be addicting. And if you speak publicly, it's even worse. Because in public speakers, there's normally a greater need for affirmation than there is in the regular person. I'm assuming psychologists did the legwork, so I'm not lying to you. But that's what the gist of it is. And on top of those highs come the seductions of being seen as humble and hip and genuine, being cool for introducing people to a very cool Jesus. And believe it or not, these issues can be found in any area of public ministry, not just standing behind a podium or a music stand and speaking. It's obviously in this one. But just thinking about our church, if you're a part of the homeless ministry, if you are on the worship team, if you help with Kingdom Kids, Little Lamb, the nursery, any time someone is in a position of authority and responsibility, those seductions exist. The want to be loved and admired, to be paid attention to be held in high regard by the people you care about, exists in all of us. And Jesus cuts to the heart of those issues. In John 7:18, he who speaks on his own authority seeks to win honor for himself. He whose teaching originates with himself seeks his own glory. But he who seeks the glory and is eager for the honor of him who sent him, he is true. And there is no unrighteousness or falsehood or deception in him. Ow. How much of what we do as Christians has no unrighteousness and no falsehood and no deception anywhere in it? I'm saying this in love. I know that if we have these problems, we can fix them because Jesus already did. We just have to walk in it. And so the issue here isn't one of action, but it's one of motive. I've said it before and I'll say it again. It's one of the things I love about God is that he doesn't care about your actions as much as he cares about your motivations for your actions. When Nicodemus visited Jesus, he visited at night. Why? Because of fear about what the other Pharisees would do if they found out he was visiting Jesus. And Nicodemus wasn't just the only one. If we go to John 12:42, it says, "And yet, in spite of all this, even of the leading men, the authorities, and the nobles believed and trusted in him. But because of the Pharisees, they did not confess it, for fear that if they should acknowledge him, they would be expelled from the synagogue." Modern day phrasing for that is you would worry about being excommunicated. That's the term. The Pharisees and the authorities and the nobles chose job security over Jesus when he was there in the flesh. Indeed. This fear is a powerful force. You see, the parents of a man who was healed of blindness were still afraid of these same Pharisees. If we go to John chapter 9, verses 18 through 22, it says, "However, the Jews did not believe that he had really been blind and that he had received his sight until they summoned the parents of the man. They asked him, 'Is this your son, whom you reported as having been born blind? How then does he see now?'" I can't stop it. I know. I can't stop it. And his parents answered, "We know that this is our son and that he was born blind. But as to how he can see, we don't know. Or who opened his eyes, we don't know. He is of age. Ask him. Let him speak for himself and give his own account of it." His parents said this because they feared the leaders of the Jews. For the Jews had already agreed that if anyone should acknowledge Jesus to be the Christ, he should be expelled and excluded from the synagogue. The fear of man and peer pressure. What will others think? It's deadly. Well, that's what we say. But we'll get to that in a minute. It can be deadly. See, if we go to Matthew 14, verses 6 through 10, "But when Herod's birthday came, the daughter of Herodias, danced in the midst before the company and pleased and fascinated Herod. And so he promised with an oath to give her whatever she might ask. And she, being put forward and prompted by her mother, said, 'Give me the head of John the Baptist right here on a platter.' And the king was distressed and sorry because of his oaths and his guests. He ordered it to be given to her. He sent and had John beheaded in the prison." Why was John the Baptist killed? Because of the oaths and the guests of Herod. An innocent man was guillotined at a dinner party because of a dinner party. And not at the dinner party, it was in the prison. But he was guillotined because of a dinner party. Fear and peer pressure, man, I'm telling you. And until we appreciate and understand how deep this fear runs, we're fooling ourselves about our own motives. I said we were going to talk about us a little bit tonight. Think about the list of things you wouldn't be caught dead doing. My list, a short summary of it, includes appearing on The View, going into a gay bar, or almost anything that makes me the center of attention. That's kind of it. But everyone has their list. The author, when he was writing the book, said one of the things he refused to do was yodel on Oprah in a tutu. That was beyond the pale for him. More power to you. See, but everyone has their own list because this fear runs deep. Runs all the way back to Genesis. If we go to Genesis 3:10, he, God, said, "I heard the sound of you walking in the garden." Oh, I'm sorry, this is Adam talking. Forgive me, I'm wrong. He said, "I heard the sound of you walking in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked, and I hid myself." The fear of exposure to Adam and the fear of the exposure that Adam and Eve felt is more powerful than we would care to admit. You see, we want to be praised while dreading exposure. See, now this gives power in cultures. Okay? Think for a moment. I could choose an alternative, but I decided to be slightly less of a boat rocker. Think about the Green Movement. The Green Movement is in vogue. It is enlightened. It is the cause du jour. I have nothing against the Green Movement. I don't think us polluting and hurting the earth is a very wise way to continue living. However, every company and public figure has worked to ally themselves with the Green Movement and put their green credentials on display. And working for a better world isn't a bad thing. But if it was from a humble motivation, we wouldn't be shouting our involvement from the rooftops, would we? So, yeah, motives are important. And if you think I'm wrong, I want you to go back to high school. Well, for you it might be in black and white, I don't know. But go back to high school. Can't softball them in like that. I love you dearly, Ruth Ann, but you made that too easy. Okay, so think back to high school. Now, if you weren't a part of the in crowd, you still had your group of friends that you wanted to hang around and impress. You dressed accordingly. You listened to certain music. You watched certain shows. You read certain books, whatever else it might have been. If you actually did whatever you wanted to do in high school all of the time, you'd have been eaten alive. And that was before you got home to your parents. You'd have been eaten alive. You see, we still live the calculated lives we led in high school. The friends might have changed, the goals might have changed, but that calculation's there. You can see the fear of what others think of us is a powerful motivator. And it makes you slightly different when you're around different crowds. Now, I strive to be the same at work, at church, in private, but I'd be lying to you if I told you I had the same type of conversations at work as I do when I'm Ubering. Everyone, almost everyone, to one degree or another, tries to be a social chameleon. Or they try to be bright, flaming pink, and so that everyone notices them all the time. Either way, it's calculated. And here's the tough part. Which of these different versions that you present of yourself is actually you? Is there one? Or are we only an amalgamation of the people that we admire, the characters on books and television that we like, the books that we've read, and the other things that we're entertained by and we take in? Are we just an amalgamation of the things that we enjoy from those, or are we actually ourselves? Now, they influence one another. You'd be wrong if you said that what you take in doesn't influence you. And people have been apt to think that. But it's a little known fact that Clark Gable had to produce, or had to be involved in undershirt ads. Because in the movie It Happened One Night, when he and Claudette Colbert have the tie separating the room, he takes off his overshirt. He doesn't have an undershirt on. The undershirt business almost went under. He had to do ads to keep it going. We care. Do we realize that whatever motivates it, do we think about how often we shift our personality, if only subtly? Do we realize that sometimes our personality has a motive behind it? And if we take an honest look at ourselves, we see what our motivations are, then we can appreciate how remarkable it is, how desirable it is to be true. When Jesus was tempted in the wilderness, he was proven true. Now, we know that Jesus was genuine in his test because A, he was completely human, and B, after his test was finished, angels had to minister to him afterward. It was tough. I've never had to have angels come down to help me out after I go through something. But Jesus did. And we think of integrity and self-discipline as the things we do to resist temptation by pure motive, pure willpower and resolve, by force of will. You see, but there's a deeper level, one where we don't even want the things that are being offered to us as temptations. And those things come from a heart change. It's when the goodness of God runs so deep in us. The best example I have is that when a man or a woman doesn't want anyone but their spouse, so they can't be tempted by anyone but their spouse. And if it's your spouse, it's not a temptation. But that's the result of a heart change. And if we look back at what makes us false, it's from a motivation of fear. There's a reason I harped on fear. It's fear that comes from not knowing Jesus well enough and not allowing Jesus to change us. If we go to 1 John chapter 4, verse 18, this is in the updated Amplified. It may not match exactly what's on the screen behind me. It says, "There is no fear in love. Dread does not exist. But perfect, complete, full-grown love drives out fear. Because fear involves the expectation of divine punishment. So the one who is afraid of God's judgment is not perfected in love, has not grown into a sufficient understanding of God's love." And verse 19 very famously says, "For we love him because he first loved us." Something to understand about the Jewish culture is that it is arguably the most family-centric culture in the world. Honor thy father and mother was a commandment, not a suggestion. And when Jesus performed his first miracle at the wedding in Cana, it was because of what Mary said. It was because his mother got involved. So when the word comes to Jesus, we're in Matthew 12, verses 46 through 50. When word comes to Jesus that his mother and his brothers are outside waiting for him, the expectation is that he's going to stop what he's doing, he'll go out to talk to them, and he'll come back and continue. Matthew 12, 46. Jesus was still speaking to the people when, behold, his mother and brothers stood outside seeking to speak to him. See, I told you. And someone said to him, "Listen, your mother and your brothers are standing outside seeking to speak to you." But he replied to the man who told him, "Who's my mother? Who is my mother? And who are my brothers?" And stretching out his hand not only the 12 disciples, but all his adherents, he said, "Here are my mother and my brothers. For whoever does the will of my Father in heaven is my brother and sister and mother." You see, Jesus didn't do what was expected of him in that moment. Jesus left them standing in the street. Jesus was perfect love in action. And most of us aren't free in this way, especially when our family's involved. See, we feel a sense of obligation or a sense of duty towards them. And Jesus doesn't. I don't think any of us really are free from that. You see, success or opposition have no sway over Jesus' actions or his personality. The crowds that mobbed him with love and adoration are the same crowds who cried out for his crucifixion. Jesus is free from the fear of man. And it's more than integrity, even though it includes integrity. He is true to himself. The Father, what the moment requires, he's true to love, and I love that he is true to us. In a world where people shellac themselves with fig leaves, Jesus walks around naked. And we hate it when someone lies to us. It can ruin a friendship. It can ruin a relationship. There's nothing, but the worst thing is to be a lie. We're repulsed by the man has two families living two separate lives, not because he was lying about what he was doing, but because he lied about who he is. And who we are is the most essential gift we have to give. The most essential gift we have to give is ourselves. Which, for anyone who's watching online, that's the reason that we're not supposed to have sex until we're married. Only one person gets that from us. Only one person can. And if we aren't true, if we aren't true about ourselves, then we just aren't true. We've gotten used to committing dozens of little lies about ourselves every day. Jesus didn't, and Jesus doesn't, because Jesus is faithful, and he is true. Now maybe this is why God answered Moses the way he did at the burning bush. We're going to go all the way back to Exodus chapter 3, verses 13 and 14. Do I need to break y'all up back there? I've got a yes and a no. Someone's lying. Anyway, Exodus 3, 13 and 14. And Moses said to God, behold, when I come to the Israelites, it's the wrong voice. And when Moses said to God, behold, when I come to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they say to me, what's his name? What shall I say to them? And God said to Moses, I am who I am, and what I am, and I will be what I will be. And he said, you shall say to the Israelites, I am has sent me to you. Who is God? He is who he is. He is only himself. And so is Jesus. Because in Hebrews chapter 1, verse 3, this is another one in the updated Amplified, and this one is going to be very different to what you have on the screen, so I'm going to read it slowish. It's long, forgive me. The Son is the radiance and only expression of the glory of our awesome God, reflecting God's Shekinah glory, the light being, the brilliant light of the divine, and the exact representation and perfect imprint of his Father's essence, and upholding and maintaining and propelling all things, the entire physical and spiritual universe by his powerful word, carrying the universe along to its predetermined goal. When he himself and no other had, by offering himself on the cross as a sacrifice for our sin, accomplished purification from sins and established our freedom from guilt, he sat down, revealing his completed work at the right hand of the Majesty on high, revealing his divine authority. I told you it was different from what's up there. We've been saying it through the whole series, but it bears repeating. When we look at Jesus, we're looking at the Father. And God is who he is. Every element of Jesus' personality put together is who he is. Playful, cunning, generous, fierce, honest, free, humble, beautiful, and loving, compassionate. The list goes on forever. But at the core of it, Jesus is simply being true and being himself. Stripping the religious fog away from Jesus doesn't change who he is, but it lets us see him more clearly. It's like the change in The Wizard of Oz. Okay? Follow me. I got a few different ones of these, and I like both of them, so I'm going to use both of them. The movie starts in sepia tone, which is that brownish color that's not black and white, but it's not color. And when they get to Oz, in the blink of an eye, it goes from sepia to kaleidoscopic technicolor. If you put a white light, similarly, if you put a white light through an uncolored, clear prism, you get every color visible to the human eye shown as a rainbow. If you don't know what I'm talking about, picture the album art to Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon in your head. Because that's what it is. All right? I know, I had to throw a Pink Floyd reference in somewhere. Come on, give me a chance. And that's what it is. Every color in that light is distinct and separate, but it's a part of the whole. Jesus, that is Jesus' personality that I've been harping on about now for a month and a half. And I'm going to get metaphorical here for a moment, so bear with me. That white light, okay, that white light is Jesus being true. That is him in all of himself. He is who he is. And if we put that light through a prism of any color that isn't clear, the color of the prism is what shows. Everything else gets absorbed in that filter. And only that one color shows out. If you've got a yellow prism, you only see yellow light. If you've got a green prism, you only see green light. Religion puts on colored prisms. And it takes away from the whole while appearing to perform the same function. That's why it's so dangerous. And it doesn't change who Jesus is. That same white light goes into any prism we put in that test file. It doesn't change who Jesus is. It only changes how we see him. And maybe in this clear light, we can look at one of the most famous and inscrutable moments of Jesus's famous and famously misrepresented life, walking on the water. Our last set of verses is John 6, verses 16 through 22. When evening came, his disciples went down to the sea, and they took a boat and were going across the sea to Capernaum. Now it was now dark, and still Jesus had not yet come back to them. Meanwhile, the sea was getting rough and rising high because of a great, violent wind that was blowing. However, when they had rowed 3 or 4 miles, they saw Jesus walking on the sea and approaching the boat. And they were terrified. It says afraid, it also is terrified. But Jesus said to them, "It is I, be not afraid. I am. Stop being frightened." Then they were quite willing and glad for him to come into the boat. And now the boat went at once to the land they had steered toward, and immediately they reached the shore toward which they had been slowly making their way. The next day, the crowd that had still remained standing on the other side of the sea realized that there had only been one small boat there, and that Jesus had not gone into it with his disciples, but his disciples had gone away by themselves. Now, so far, we've covered this. Jesus is pretty hush-hush about his miracles. He's happy to do them. He was sent there to do miracles. That was one of the things. But he doesn't normally do them for an audience. He doesn't want people to spread his fame, even though we know that they will. He's not a show-off. But this almost seems flagrant. I mean, what's going on? So look at the facts of it. So the disciples were headed straight across to Capernaum, which is like 3.5, maybe 4 miles away. And they left without Jesus because he stayed around to dismiss the crowd and pray on the mountain. Now earlier, in this chapter, when Jesus had found out about John's death, he went away to be private with his grief, but the crowds caught him. And he healed them, he fed them, and he sent them off. And now, Jesus gets to be alone. It's hours later. Don't worry, we're almost done. It's deep into the night. And the disciples see Jesus walking on the sea toward the boat. Now, it could have been that Jesus wanted to show off his unforgettable power over nature. You see, but he doesn't need to do that. The miracle of feeding the 5,000 was earlier that day. The disciples had already seen Jesus rebuke a storm on the sea they're going across. They've seen him raise the dead. Power over nature is pretty clearly established by now. And if it isn't, he's going to be resurrected and cemented. You see, but here's this piece of information. Jesus intended to cross the water. Walking around that sea took a 3.5-ish mile trip to about 25 miles. Now that would take a whole day. So Jesus decided to take a shortcut. Because the shortest distance between any 2 points is a straight line. As the crow flies, straight line. And so Jesus didn't fly. He just walked. Happened to be that there was a lake beneath his feet. He even tells the disciples, "I am," before he came into the boat. Folks, I think Jesus was just being himself. I don't think he intended to show off. I think he went, I got to get there. I didn't make it. And Jesus, I said it before, but I'll say it again. Jesus isn't just true to himself. He isn't just true to love. He's true to us. He'd never lie to us. He'd never misrepresent the Father. And he helps us when we're not being true to ourselves. So the question tonight is, how true are we? I haven't gotten somber in this series, and I didn't realize I was going to until right now. But how true are we? Do we know who the true us is? Because God will tell us. The Holy Spirit living in us will tell us. Jesus will help us find it. I'll give you a hint. It's who God made you to be. That's the true you. And maybe someone's watching online, and they think that I have just lied to y'all for the past 45-ish minutes. That I've been spitting so much bull, they're going to have to put on hip waders. I don't know what they're thinking. But if that's what they think, I think it's only because they don't know Jesus. And if that's the case, I would love to introduce you to him. It's really simple. Romans 10:9 says, if you confess with your mouth and believe in your heart that Jesus Christ is Lord, you will be saved. God made it that simple. We don't have to do anything else. If that's all you did and you died on the next heartbeat, I get to see you forever. So I hope you like seeing me. I'm looking forward to seeing you. It's that simple. So we're going to bow our heads, close our eyes. I'm going to make a prayer. I'm going to say a benediction. But after the prayer, if you have something you need prayer on, I'm going to stay up here for a little bit. I would love to get to come into agreement with you about whatever's going on. God, thank you so much. Thank you for being true. Thank you for sending Jesus. Thank you for loving us the way that you do. God, I thank you that this word is seed that has been planted into good soil. I believe that it will take root and bear fruit. Father, I thank you that as we go from here, we are doers of the word, not hearers only. God, I thank you that we would take this and learn to be more like Jesus in all that we say and do and act and think. That we would learn, or that we would come to know Jesus better and to love him the best. Thank you for being true. I speak a blessing on everyone here in the 6 major areas of life: business, home, social, physical, mental, and spiritual. Father, pour out your love, your power, your spirit, your grace, your mercy, your truth in such a mighty way that when the rest of the world sees them, they'll say, surely these people have been with Jesus. If you receive that, say amen. Amen. Wonderful. Now, if you're watching online, I forgot to say it, you can always send a message to Heart of God Fellowship through the website, through the Facebook page. We will respond. If you feel like giving tens of thousands of dollars, there's a plate back here. We'll take any money, though. And if you're online, you can go to heartofgodfellowship.com. There's a very easy giving tab to go to. It's very explanatory. Know that I love you all terribly. There is absolutely nothing you can do about it. Be safe, and we will see you next time.